In the Asatru and pagan community, a lot of people subscribe to the philosophy of Nietzsche, unfortunately. I know his teachings are adharmic, but he's held in high regard in the West. Could you explain how and why his philosophy is adharmic? I think it would help people in the Asatru and pagan community from tripping into the Nietzschean pitfall. Also, are any of his teachings redeemable, or is everything from Nietzsche adharmic? Very good. I have said this before, and there are historical reasons why this is the case. I'm not going to discuss this for an hour, but I will go a little bit in depth, actually. From a historical perspective, Nietzsche was a very interesting person. He was an individual who came about in philosophy at a time when the prevailing philosophy in Germany at the time, which is where he was primarily Hegelianism. And what Hegelianism was it was not only Christian based, it was Lutheran based. It was something that very much believed in the idea of morals, in the idea of ethics, etc. He also came about at a time when there had been already, for several hundred years previous to Nietzsche, and understandable, actually, on some levels, but infantile on other levels, rebellion against previous Christianity. So in other words, by the time Nietzsche came along, there was the Renaissance, there was the so-called Enlightenment, there were the positivists, there were the scientists, there were individuals who, in one way or another, were rebelling against what was Christianity at the time. Nietzsche, interestingly, came at the very tail end of that. I should also mention there were the young Hegelians as well. There was a group of philosophers known as the young Hegelians, and they were very much rebelling against Christianity. So Nietzsche was merely one of these individuals who saw Christianity and many of its faults. Unfortunately, this is where he went wrong. I'm starting from the general, and then I will get more and more specific. Like many individuals who are pseudo-intellectuals, and he was a pseudo-intellectual, it bothers me to this day that people call him a philosopher. He was not a philosopher in the strict sense of the term. He was not a system maker. He was not an individual who used logical argumentation, etc. He was an individual he was a thinker. He was a thinker the way, I guess, Jordan Peterson today would be a thinker, or any person on YouTube would be a thinker. But he was not a philosopher per se. Rather, his idea was to throw literally the baby out with the bathwater. He saw the problems in Christianity, in Abrahamism, let's say, to state it more accurately. And his idea was to go to the furthest extreme away from Abrahamism, from Christianity, that is, from religion itself, and to become an outright atheist. So indeed, he's the person who came up with the term, God is dead. It's an interesting thing. Let me back up for a second, then I'll continue with the philosophical, historical lecture. I've always found it interesting how I've also seen that many Asatru and pagan individuals have high regard for Nietzsche, even though the man was a radical atheist. He literally made the statement, this is his quote, God is dead. And unfortunately, he didn't mean just the God of Christianity. He meant religion is dead, metaphysics is dead. He meant anything that smacked of the spiritual is dead. He was a radical materialist. He was an individual who saw himself as being at war with all religion. So thus, according to Nietzsche, for the followers of Asatru out there, and forgive me for saying this, I'm paraphrasing Nietzsche, Odin is dead, Thor is dead, Freya is dead, etc., etc., etc. So it's always been amazing to me, very interesting, how individuals who consider themselves pagans have an interest in Nietzsche, not understanding that he's at war with you. Intellectually, he's at war with you. So this is the first thing to understand about him. There can be nothing dharmic that arises from an adharmic philosophy, from an atheistic philosophy. If you have a dharmic person and an adharmic person look up and say, oh, the sky is blue. All right, they have something of insignificance as far as truth that they share in common. But otherwise, to try to derive Dharma from its opposite is not a possibility. And it's astounding to me how to this day people don't understand this. You cannot take the worst of things and from that create something beautiful. You cannot create a philosophy that is at war with truth and say, oh no, there are a few good things there, we're going to derive truth from that. That's not how truth works. Truth works in the opposite way. Truth starts with perfection. Truth starts as the whole. Truth starts as the transcendent, as that which is wholly perfect and pure. And then, due to the influence of human beings in illusion, it devolves from there. So this is the first thing to say about Nietzsche, is that he was indeed an atheist. The second thing is what I said before. He was not a philosopher. I've read, to my knowledge, maybe I missed one, I've read everything that Nietzsche wrote. So for those out there who want to lie to yourselves and say, oh, well, this Acharyaji, yeah, he's a nice guy, but what does he know about Nietzsche? I've read everything that Nietzsche wrote, to my memory. Again, I may have missed one little book somewhere, but I've read everything. I have witnesses. I have all his works downstairs in my library. I've read them all. He's not a philosopher. He doesn't do philosophy in any traditional sense of that term. Traditional meaning classical philosophy, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Plotinus, in accordance with medieval philosophy, the scholastics, in accordance with modern philosophy, either the Anglo-American school or the continental school. He doesn't do propositional analysis of any sort, not really. This is why when you read his works, and this is a double-edged sword, when you read his works, they tend to be story and aphorism. They're aphoristic in nature. They're not philosophy per se. Now, that was good for him because for most people, it's easier for them to read a story than to do actual philosophy. That's the only reason why he's so popular, because the bus driver can read Nietzsche. The ditch digger can read Nietzsche, because he made his works very easy to understand. But again, there isn't anything of actual philosophical content that is there. There is no Weltanschauung, there is no worldview, there is no systematic explanation of all of reality that is there. He was not a philosopher in any true sense of the term. The other problem, of course, with him is when it comes to ethics and morality. Again, being a simple-minded thinker, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, he, like many of his contemporaries at the time, had this stereotypical, caricatured idea that all morality, all ideas of right versus wrong, good and evil, etc., all arose exclusively from Christianity. And if you look at the pre-Christian religions, if you look at the paganisms, they were, again, the stereotype that people had in that era, in the 1800s. That, they all just were immoral and engaged in orgies. They didn't understand right from wrong. It was meaningless to them, etc., etc. So he dates himself. Because now we understand that when you look at actual pre-Christian European religion, they believed and taught virtue and principles of ethics and morality. In fact, in some cases, even stricter than Christianity. So his thinking as far as morality was relegated to his time, and with what little the scholars of that era knew about Christianity versus pre-Christian European religion, and then what to speak of all the other religions in the world. Indeed, I know for a fact, because I know the history of Indology, many Indologists of his time even believed that Hinduism was pretty much the same sort of immoral, orgiastic sort of crazy, chaotic mess that they thought paganism was as well. Of course, they were wrong about that. In the 19th century, many scholars truly believed that Christianity was the only moral religion upon the face of the earth, the only religion that taught ethics, that taught morality, that had principles, that had commandments, that had precepts, etc. So he was wrong about this. He is very dated. Now scholars understand that no, you look at all the pre-Christian European religions, they were as strict as the Christians were when it came to right and wrong. So indeed, he knew nothing about morality whatsoever. And I can go on. I can go on. His idea of the Übermensch is an absolute radical, meaningless mess that so many people try to speculate about and people cannot understand. The idea of the Übermensch is something that predates Nietzsche by an infinity. And the true idea of what an Übermensch is an individual who has transcended ego. It's the perfect yogi. And they don't transcend good versus wrong. They become purely good, Shuddha Sattva. That is the Übermensch. That is the supreme man. An individual who is in full and absolute control of himself. Nietzsche couldn't even come close to understanding what an Übermensch was. He himself was not. He himself was not. Finally, and truthfully, I'm trying to go fast because we have like 100 more questions here. I could actually speak about this much more systematically and more in depth. But finally, yes, you do need to look at his life. There is no such thing as separating a philosopher, a true philosopher, from the philosopher's life. In other words, if a person is espousing something that he himself cannot even come close to encapsulating as an example through his own life, then that's a fraud. That is the traditional understanding. Again, that's the Platonic, the Aristotelian understanding. That is the understanding of all the Vedic philosophers. This is the understanding in Buddhism. You teach it, you better live it. That is the understanding. And for all of Nietzsche's claims that he was teaching the path to joy, he was the most miserable human being of his time, to the point where, we all know this, he literally lost his mind for the last several years of his life. Now, one could say, well, but that's an ad hominem attack. No, it's not. When an individual claims, I have the path to joy, I'm going to write books on the path to joy, I'm going to make this claim, you're all wrong, I'm right, I have the path to joy, and I must obviously be following my own path, and my path leads to the opposite of joy, that shows you it was all a lie. It shows you that it was a lie. So indeed, had Nietzsche actually had the path to joy and true knowledge, that would have been exhibited in his own life. Instead, he died a crazy person. He died without a mind. And this shows you the encapsulation of the ultimate goal of his philosophy. You follow Nietzsche, you're doomed for the same. You look at all the individuals who teach Sanatana Dharma. They don't go crazy in the last 10, 12, 20 years of their life. You look at all the teachers of Sanatana Dharma from the very beginning, from as far back as your imagination can go, to today. And you find people who are the opposite of crazy. You find people who are absolutely in control of their minds, of themselves, and indeed who have peace and who have joy. This is how you know whether a philosophy is true. Can you actually follow it? And what does it actually lead to once you follow it? Well, we saw what was the case with Nietzsche. You go insane if you follow Nietzsche. So indeed, if you are a follower of Asatru, time to give up Nietzsche at this point. He has nothing to do with Asatru. He has nothing to do with paganism. He was a latecomer wannabe. He was not a philosopher in any way whatsoever. Trust someone who has studied pretty much every important philosophical system upon the face of the earth, and not as a hobby.